The Velthari Integration Center smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, and the particular kind of hopelessness that settles into rooms where people wait for things that probably won't come. Sale had been sitting on the same plastic chair for 6 hours. She knew it was 6 hours because she had counted the ceiling tiles twice, watched the number change on the digital display board from 47 to 91 and back down to 12 in no discernible pattern, and because the pale blue wash of her skin, the part of her that was undeniably, visibly, not human, had begun to ache from the recycled air and the fluorescent light overhead that flickered every 40 seconds on the dot. She had counted those too. The Integration Center in Dalworth, Oregon was not a large facility. It occupied the ground floor of what had once been a credit union, and you could tell the drive-through window had been converted into an intake booth, and the old vault door was still visible at the back, now painted over in cheerful teal with a mural of clasped hands, one brown, one pale blue. Together forward, read the text beneath it. The mural had been there since the first contact occurred 7 years ago. The paint was peeling at the corners. Sale looked at it and thought, yes, that seems about right. She was here for the housing registry. Specifically, she had been summoned here. The word on the official letter was *invited*, but it had the weight of a summons because her placement in the Dalworth temporary housing unit had come to an end. 8 months. The maximum allowed under the Displaced Persons Relief Act. After that, the expectation was that an alien resident would have secured independent lodging through one of several approved channels: rental application, cultural placement program, or cohabitation sponsorship. Sale had tried all three. Rental applications, 47 submitted over 6 months. 46 rejections, most of them form letters, 3 of them personal enough to sting. One landlord had called her directly to say he thought her kind were fine, really, no offense, but his other tenants had expressed concerns and he had to think about the building community. She had thanked him politely and hung up and sat very still for a long time afterward. Cultural placement program. She had been matched with a Velthari family in Portland. The Sarath household, 6 members, grandmother to infant, crowded into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side. They had been kind. They had been genuinely, warmly kind, and it had nearly broken her heart when she understood that she could not stay, that to stay would be to take something from people who had less than nothing, to eat food that was already stretched thin, to breathe air in a room where children slept on rotation. She had left after 3 weeks with a small gift from the grandmother, a woven cord bracelet in the Velthari mourning colors, which meant something different in their tradition than mourning. It meant you have been witnessed. You are not invisible to us. She wore it still, on her right wrist under her sleeve. Cohabitation sponsorship. This required a human citizen to formally register as a cohabitant sponsor, which meant filing paperwork, passing a background verification, and agreeing to provide housing for a minimum of 12 months. Several advocacy organizations maintained lists of willing sponsors. Sale had applied to be matched 3 times. The first 2 times, no match had been found. The 3rd time, a match had been initiated. A woman named Donna Heller in southeast Dalworth who had agreed to host a Velthari female resident. And Sale had gone to the preliminary meeting with careful hope, the kind of hope she had learned to hold lightly. Donna Heller had looked at her across a coffee shop table, at the pale blue of her skin and the silver-veined markings along her temples and the slight luminescence of her eyes, and said, "I thought they'd send someone who looked more," and then stopped, and said she needed to think about it, and never called back. That had been 2 months ago. Now Sale sat in the plastic chair, while the number on the board cycled and the fluorescent light flickered, and the mural peeled at its corners, and she waited to be told what came next. She already knew what came next. There was a transit voucher protocol for Velthari nationals who could not secure permanent housing. It involved a transfer to a centralized holding residence in a larger city, Seattle, most likely, where the wait times for placement were shorter and the population density higher and the odds, statistically, were better. She had read about it. She had talked to another Velthari woman, Assel, who had gone through it 2 years ago. "It's not terrible," Assel had said, with the precise, careful tone of someone describing something that had been quite terrible. "You get a room to yourself. The food is adequate. She had paused. You just become a number again for a while." Sale had been a number before. In the first camps after the displacement, before the Accords, she had been very good at being a number. She was afraid of how easy it would be to become one again. "Sale Veth." She looked up. The woman calling her name from the intake booth was young, human, with tired eyes and a lanyard that said caseworker, TAMSIN in large print. Tamsin looked at her clipboard, then at Sale, and something shifted in her expression, not unkindness exactly, but the particular professional gentleness of someone who is about to deliver news they have delivered many times before. "Come on back," Tamsin said. "We'll go through your options." Options asterisk, Sale thought and rose from the chair and followed. The meeting was 11 minutes long. She knew because she watched the clock above Tamsin's desk. Tamsin was not unkind. She explained the transit voucher program clearly, gave Sale a printed information sheet, told her the Seattle facility had a good Velthari community liaison on staff, and that most residents found the transition difficult but manageable. She said asterisk difficult but manageable twice. She asked if Sale had any questions. Sale asked when she would need to leave Dalworth. Tamsin said, gently 14 days. Sale nodded and thanked her and took the printed information sheet and the transit voucher in its small envelope and walked back through the waiting room past the peeling mural and out through the glass doors into the gray Oregon afternoon. It was raining. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not moving, the rain falling on her face, and she felt the particular sensation she had learned to recognize over the past 2 years. The feeling of something narrowing, of a door closing, of a life becoming smaller by a precise and measurable increment. Then she began to walk. She walked without a destination at first, which was unlike her. Sale was methodical by nature and by necessity, the kind of person who planned routes and checked transit schedules. But today she simply walked, and the walking carried her through downtown Dalworth and past the river and down toward the waterfront, where there was a small public park with a dock that jutted out into the gray water. She walked to the end of the dock and stopped. The water was dark and the rain made circles on it, and somewhere behind the clouds the sun was setting, which meant the light was going amber gray, and a heron was standing on a piling 20 feet away looking at nothing with the total focused patience of a creature that had no concept of 14 days. Sale sat down on the dock, legs dangling over the water, and put the transit voucher envelope in her lap and the information sheet beside it, and she looked at the heron, and something in her chest, the tight, careful thing she had been managing for months, gave way all at once, very quietly, like a knot releasing. She put her face in her hands. She didn't cry loudly. Velthari grief was usually quiet, a physical thing, a trembling, the silver markings at her temples brightening slightly as the emotional current ran through them. She sat on the end of the dock in the rain and trembled, and tried very hard not to think about how tired she was. She was so tired. Not of Dalworth, not of humans particularly. Tired of trying and being not quite enough, not quite right, not quite what anyone had in mind. Tired of being looked at and found not horrible, exactly, just asterisk other asterisk, just 1 degree outside the circle of what people could make themselves reach for. She understood it in a rational way. She was asking people to choose something unfamiliar in a world that was still working out what unfamiliar meant. But understanding a thing and bearing it without cost were different skills, and she had used up her reserves of the second one somewhere around the 43rd rejection letter. No one wants me asterisk, she thought, and the thought was so unguarded and so simple and so true in this particular moment that it made the trembling worse. She didn't say it aloud. There was no one to say it to. "Hey!" She startled so hard, she nearly went off the dock. The man who had spoken was standing at the shore end of the dock, maybe 30 feet away, holding an umbrella in one hand and a paper bag in the other. He was in his mid-30s, not tall, with the kind of build that suggested someone who worked with his hands, and he was looking at her with an expression that was not pity and not alarm, but something in between, careful, attentive. "Sorry," he said immediately. "Didn't mean to. I was just walking by and I saw you sitting out here in the rain and He stopped. "You don't have to talk to me. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Sale straightened, wiped her face with the back of her hand, tried to compose herself into something that looked like okay. She was not very good at this. The silver markings at her temples were still bright, and her eyes, which in normal light were a quiet amber, were probably showing more luminescence than she'd like. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady. This was a skill she had perfected. He looked at her for a moment, not the kind of looking that assessed her for strangeness, or catalogued the ways she was alien, but just the kind of looking that said, "I can see that you're not fine and I'm deciding what to do about that." "Okay," he said, then. "It's really raining. You want to sit under this umbrella at least." She blinked. "You can say no," he said. "It's a weird offer. I'm aware it's a weird offer." "It's yes," she said, before she quite decided to say it. "Thank you." He walked out to the end of the dock, which was a very specific kind of faith in old wood and wet conditions, and held the umbrella over both of them and sat down beside her, not too close, with the instinctive spatial courtesy that she had noticed some humans had and others didn't. They looked at the heron for a while. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Sale." "Nice to meet you, Sale." He said her name carefully, making sure he got the sound right, the short asterisk a asterisk, the soft asterisk L asterisk. Most people said it like asterisk Sale or skipped the care entirely. "This is my thinking dock, by the way. I've been coming here since I was 12. Feel free to use it whenever." She looked at him. "My thinking dock," he repeated with a small, slightly self-deprecating smile. "I don't technically own it. The city does. But I've been coming here long enough that I've started referring to it as mine in my head and occasionally out loud, which my sister says is a sign of something." "What does your sister say it's a sign of?" "Attachment issues, but she's a therapist, so she sees attachment issues everywhere." He paused. "What's in the envelope?" She looked down at the transit voucher in her lap, which had gotten damp despite the umbrella. "A voucher," she said, "for a bus to Seattle." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't want to go to Seattle?" "I don't want to be sent," she said, and then stopped, surprised at her own candor. He nodded slowly, looking at the water. The heron had not moved. "What would you stay for?" he asked. Not challengingly, genuinely, like it was a question worth asking. "If you stayed." She thought about it. She had asked herself something similar, late at night in the temporary housing unit, as a kind of torture or a kind of exercise. She was never sure which. She had a job, part-time data entry at a logistics firm, one of the ones with a Velthari integration program. She had a library card. She had learned the names of the streets that went down to the water. She had found a bakery on Merchant Street that made a particular kind of seeded bread that was almost, not quite, but almost similar to the grain bread she remembered from before. "Small things," she said. He nodded again. "Small things are usually the real ones." The rain had softened to something gentler, and the heron took 3 slow steps along the piling and resettled its wings, and Sale found, strangely, that some of the tightness in her chest had eased, not gone, but eased, the way a muscle stops cramping when you stop fighting it. "The paper bag," she said. "What's in it?" He looked down at it, apparently having forgotten he was holding it. "Oh, soup. I was bringing dinner home. Well, back to my workshop. I live above my workshop." "What kind of workshop?" "Woodworking." He tilted the bag slightly. And the soup is from the place on Harbor Street, the one with the green awning. Have you been? No. It's good. They have this, I don't know what it's actually called. The woman who owns it calls it house soup. It's got this slightly sweet broth and these noodles that... He stopped. Sorry, I talk about food when I'm nervous. She looked at him again. You're nervous? A little. He said it easily, without embarrassment, which was unexpected. I interrupted someone's private moment on a dock in the rain. That's a nerve-inducing thing to do. Why did you? He was quiet for a beat. Then, simply, because you were sitting alone in the rain with your face in your hands and I couldn't make myself keep walking. Part 2, the workshop above the water. She did not go to the soup place that night. But she thought about it, about him, about the particular quality of his attention, about the fact that he had said I couldn't make myself keep walking with the simple directness of someone who had no interest in being thought of as other than what he was. She thought about it while she packed. The temporary housing unit was a single room on the 3rd floor of a converted motel, and she didn't have much: a backpack, a duffel bag, a box of books she had accumulated from the library sale shelf, the woven cord bracelet from the grandmother in Portland. She had been careful not to accumulate too much, all through the last 2 years, because things had weight when you had to carry them, and she had carried enough. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the transit voucher envelope and thought about 14 days. She thought about the heron, and the rain making circles on the water, and a man who talked about soup when he was nervous. In the morning, she went to the housing registry's public access terminal. They had a row of them in the library, and she searched the cohabitation sponsorship database one more time, not with much hope, mostly because she had promised herself she would try every option before she agreed to the Seattle facility. The database showed 3 potential sponsors in the Dalworth area. 2 of them she had already been declined by. The 3rd was new, added to the registry in the past month, which was why she hadn't seen it before. Sponsor Caleb Marsh, 34, single, residence, 14 Harbor Point Lane, above-grade workshop unit, private room available. Background verification complete, status, active, unmatched. She read it twice. She sat very still for a while. Then she thought, this is probably a coincidence, because Dalworth is not a large city and there is only one workshop above the waterfront, and the listing says Harbor Point Lane. Then she thought, but maybe it isn't. Then she thought, this is the kind of thing I would normally not do. Then she went to the integration center and filed a match request for Caleb Marsh of 14 Harbor Point Lane. The match confirmation came back in 3 hours. The next step in the cohabitation process was a supervised preliminary meeting at the integration center, mandatory, 15 minutes, with a caseworker present. Tamsin was her caseworker. Tamsin looked at the match request with an expression that said she was trying to remember if she'd ever processed a voluntary reapplication within 48 hours of a transit voucher issuance, and concluded that she had not, but that nothing in the regulations prohibited it. Okay, Tamsin said. I'll reach out to Mr. Marsh to schedule the preliminary meeting. You understand that even with a successful preliminary meeting, the cohabitation agreement needs to be finalized within your remaining 12 days, Sale said. I know. Caleb Marsh came in the next afternoon. She was waiting in the same plastic chairs when he came through the glass doors, and she watched him scan the room and find her, and she watched the moment when he recognized her, the small pause, the recalibration, the expression that moved through something she couldn't quite read and settled into something warm and careful. He crossed the room and sat down across from her. You're in the database, she said. I am, he said. You registered 3 weeks ago. I did. She studied him. He was dressed differently from the dock work clothes, replaced by something cleaner, but still comfortable, still himself. He had the same quality of attention she had noticed before, Not performing, not angling, simply present. Why, she asked. He considered it, in the way she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him, not stalling, but genuinely taking the question seriously. My neighbor, he said, Petra, she's Velthari, came over in the second wave. She'd been trying to find someone to sponsor her sister who was in one of the transit facilities in Seattle. She was telling me about it and he paused. I have a room. I have more space than I need. I've always had more space than I need, which my sister says is also a sign of something. A small smile. I thought, why not? Did Petra's sister find a match? Yeah, in November, different sponsor in Bend. He looked at her steadily. So I've been in the database, unmatched for 3 weeks. And then you happen to be walking by the dock. I walk by the dock every night. That's my route home from the grocery store. She looked at him for a long moment. This is a strange situation, she said. It is, he agreed, but strange doesn't mean bad. Tamsin emerged from the back office then and called them both in, and the preliminary meeting proceeded in the manner prescribed by the cohabitation protocol, questions about living arrangements, shared spaces, house rules, expectations. Caleb had clearly read the documentation. He'd prepared. He had a printed floor plan of the unit above his workshop, had noted which room would be hers, had thought through the question of shared kitchen use and bathroom scheduling with the same careful practicality he seemed to bring to everything. He did not once look at her like she was a problem he was solving. He looked at her like she was a person. When Tamsin stepped out to make copies of the paperwork, Sale said quietly, "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said. This is not a small thing. 12 months minimum, a stranger in your space." "I know what the agreement says." He said it gently, not impatiently. "I read it before I registered." "Most people who register," she said, "don't when they see." She stopped, started again. Donna Heller said she'd thought they'd send someone who looked more. She didn't finish that sentence either. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said evenly, "Donna Heller is an idiot." And something in Sale's chest did something she hadn't expected. She almost laughed. It wasn't a funny thing he'd said exactly, but it had the particular quality of someone who had seen the wound clearly and named the thing that made it and was not going to pretend it wasn't real. And there was something in that honesty that was more comforting than sympathy would have been. "I like your markings," he said after a moment. "The silver ones. I was going to say so on the dock, but I didn't want to be." He made a small gesture, weird about it. She looked at him. "They get brighter when you're upset," he said. "Or maybe when you're feeling things strongly. I noticed on the dock." "Yes," she said, "they do." Is it okay that I noticed?" "Yes," she said, and realized as she said it that she meant it in a larger way than just the question he'd asked. Part 3, 14 Harbor Point Lane. She moved in on a Wednesday. The room was on the east side of the building, above the workshop, with a window that looked out over the water. It had a bed and a dresser and a small desk and a hook on the back of the door, and it smelled like cedar and wood shavings and something clean. Caleb had put a small plant on the windowsill, not a Velthari plant. He couldn't have known what those were, but a fern, deep green, patient-looking. "I didn't know if you liked plants," he said from the doorway. "I can take it if." "I like plants," she said. He nodded, "Good." He showed her the kitchen, her shelf in the refrigerator, her cabinet for dry goods, the drawer with the good knives, and the bathroom, and the small sitting area with the wood stove, and the workshop downstairs, which he showed her last with the particular self-consciousness of someone sharing something they care about. It was a large space, with a high ceiling and good light from the north windows and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, and along one wall there were pieces in various stages of completion. A table, a rocking chair, the beginning of something that might have been a cabinet. The work was clean and careful and beautiful. "This is remarkable," Sale said, looking at the table. He stood beside her and looked at it too, and she could feel him settling into something more comfortable, the way people do when they're talking about what they actually love. "Walnut," he said, "I'm doing a commission for a family in Corvallis. They want it for their daughter's wedding." He pointed to the grain pattern running through the surface. "See how this runs? I spent 3 hours finding the right orientation. Most people won't notice, but it matters to the piece," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. The first week was the careful kind. They navigated the shared spaces with the particular courtesy of two people who were aware of being watched, not by each other, but by the situation, by the potential for things to go wrong. They were polite. They made small talk. They left each other notes about groceries. On Thursday evening she came downstairs to find him at the work table, not working, just sitting with a cup of coffee and looking at the wood in the slow, concentrated way she'd come to recognize. And she said, "May I sit?" And he said yes, and she pulled up the spare stool and sat beside him in the workshop quiet. They didn't talk for a while. It was not an uncomfortable quiet. It was the kind of quiet that has texture to it. That means something, two people in the same room not performing anything for each other. "What are you thinking about?" she asked eventually. "The joint on this corner," he said, pointing to the edge of the table. "There's a traditional technique called a mitered bridal joint that would be more beautiful here, but I haven't done it in a while, and I'm worried I'll botch it on the commission piece." "What would you do if this wasn't a commission, if it was just for you?" "I'd try it," he said, without hesitation, "and if I botched it, I'd learn something." "So the problem is the stakes. The problem is that someone else is depending on the result." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I'm good with making things for myself. I have a harder time trusting myself when it matters to someone else." She thought about this. "I think," she said carefully, that is very relatable." He looked at her sideways, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Yeah. I have submitted 47 housing applications," she said. "Each one felt very high stakes." "That's 47. He said the number with a specific weight. "How many did you?" "One match, Donna Heller." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. Not in the way people said it when they were supposed to, but in the way people said it when they actually were. "I became," she said, "very good at the language of applications, cover letters, self-descriptions. I learned what words worked and what words didn't. I became curated. I think by the end I was describing someone who was not really me, because me was not working." He looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" he asked. "The real version?" She blinked. It was a startling question, not rude, but unguarded in the way that startled her. "I don't know how to answer that quickly," she said. "Okay," he said, "we've got time." They had time. That was the thing she hadn't expected, that there would simply be time, unstructured, without a caseworker present or a form to fill out or an outcome riding on the impression she made. They had mornings where they made coffee at the same time and talked for longer than either of them had planned. They had evenings where she sat in the workshop while he worked, and they listened to the radio, and sometimes talked and sometimes didn't. She learned. He had grown up in Dalworth. His parents had retired to Arizona. His sister was in Portland. He had tried architecture school and found the politics of it exhausting and come home and opened the workshop at 26 and never regretted it. He had been in a serious relationship until 2 years ago, with a woman named Nora who had been kind and lovely, and who had wanted a life that looked different from the one he wanted, and they had ended it badly at first and then, slowly, well. He called his mother every Sunday. He was a mediocre cook who made excellent soup. He learned. She had been a landscape architect on the Velthari home world, not the same concept as here, but close enough to translate. She had designed water features and green spaces for public areas, had spent 3 years working on a memorial garden in her city's center. She was the youngest of 4 siblings. She had never been to Earth before the displacement. She liked seeded bread from the bakery on Merchant Street and detective novels from the library sales shelf, and the way Oregon rain smelled in the morning. "You miss it," he said one evening. They were eating at the small table in the kitchen, something she had cooked. She was a better cook than him, which had been determined empirically over the first 2 weeks and accepted without ego on his part. "Your planet." "Yes," she said. "Not all the time in pieces. I miss specific things." She thought about it. The light. The light was different, longer evenings, shorter mornings. The plants were more vivid, I suppose, more color than green. She looked at the fern on her windowsill. "I still find green beautiful. It was one of the things that made Earth feel not wrong, just different." "Is there a word," he said, "in your language for that thing, missing something that you also find beautiful?" She looked at him. "There is," she said. "It's *selhari. It means approximately the grief that is also gratitude, missing something because it was worth having." He repeated it quietly, *selhari. "You said it correctly," she said with mild surprise. "I've been practicing," he said, and then looked slightly caught out, as if he hadn't meant to say that. She looked at him across the table and felt something move through her that the silver markings at her temples probably reflected, because she watched his gaze flicker there briefly, and then back to her face with an expression she was only just beginning to learn the shape of. Part 4, True Colors. 3 months in, she made a mistake. Not a large one, not the kind that breaks things, or not necessarily, but the kind that reveals them. She had been offered a promotion at the logistics firm, not a significant one, a step sideways as much as up, but it came with more hours and a small increase in pay, and a meeting with the department head to discuss her work on a routing algorithm she'd developed. She had prepared carefully. She had dressed carefully. She had been *curated*, in the way she had warned herself against but still sometimes defaulted to, still sometimes believed was necessary. The meeting had gone well, she thought. She had come home. She had started thinking of it that way, home, without examining it too closely, and found Caleb in the workshop, not working on the phone. She could tell from his posture it was a difficult call. She went upstairs to give him privacy. She was in the kitchen making tea when she heard him come up, and she called out, "There's water on if you want tea." A pause, then, "Thanks." He came in looking tired in the specific way of someone who has just handled something hard. She poured him tea without being asked and set it in front of him and sat down across from him. "Are you all right?" she asked. "My dad had a fall," he said. "He's okay. They think he's okay, but it's the kind of thing that makes you think." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "My mom wants me to come down for a few days, but the Corvallis Commission has a deadline." "Go," she said. He looked at her. "Go to your parents," she said. "The commission," she paused. "If you tell me what needs to be done, I understand joinery. Not the same tradition, but the principles are universal. I can do prep work. The detail work you do yourself." He was quiet for a long moment. "Sale," he said, "you don't have to." "I know," she said. "I want to." She paused. "You've given me a place, let me give you something back." He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted into something unguarded, something that had the quality of a person who has been trying to be careful and has just briefly, just for a moment, stopped. "Okay," he said, "thank you." He left the next morning for Arizona. She spent 3 days in the workshop, doing the prep work he described and the finish sanding and the careful cleaning of the joints, and she found, to her own surprise, that she loved it, the specificity of it, the way a well-fitted joint had a particular satisfaction when it's seated, the smell of the wood and the particular quiet of working with your hands towards something that would last. She also found on the 3rd day that she was crying. Not badly, not with her face in her hands the way she had on the dock. Just quietly, the Velthari trembling, The silver markings lit up in the workshop light, working on the surface of the table, and understanding that she was happy, and that happiness after a long time of not happiness felt fragile, like something she might break by looking at it directly. She finished the prep work. She sent him a photo. He called her instead of texting back, which was unlike him. He was a texter, she was learning, and when she answered he said, "This is beautiful, you're incredible." She didn't know what to say. She said, "How is your father?" "Better," he said. "He's already complaining about the hospital food, which is apparently a good sign." A pause. Sale. "Yes. I'll be home Friday." She noticed home. She noticed that she noticed. He came home on Friday. She was in the kitchen when she heard his truck in the drive, and she went to the window and watched him get out with his bag, and she felt something she didn't have an easy name for, a warmth that was also a kind of nervousness, a wanting something that she hadn't let herself look at directly until just now, in this specific moment, watching him walk across the gravel in the late afternoon light. Oh, asterisk, she thought, there it is. She went downstairs and met him at the door of the workshop. He stopped when he saw her. He had the particular look of someone returning to a place they hadn't been sure they'd missed until they were back in it. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. He looked past her at the table, at the finished surface, the clean joints. He set down his bag and went to it and ran his hand along the edge, slowly. "Sale," he said. "You'd have done it better," she said. "The mitered bridle joint, I did it the simpler way because—" "It's perfect," he said. He turned and looked at her. "You didn't have to do this." "I told you I wanted to." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her in the way she'd come to know, the careful, full attention. "I thought about you a lot," he said, "while I was gone." She held very still. I've been careful," he said, not looking away from her, "because I didn't want you to feel like there were strings. I didn't want you to feel like I'd registered for the program because I expected." He stopped. "I want to be clear that you don't owe me anything. The room is yours regardless. That's not what this is." "I know," she said. He exhaled. "I keep finding myself in the kitchen longer than I need to be when you're there. I keep listening for you when I'm working. I think about things during the day and I want to tell you about them." He looked slightly, like someone who has said something they weren't certain they should have. "I'm telling you this because I think you should know, not because I want you to, I mean if this is." "Caleb," she said. He stopped. "I finished the table," she said, "and I sat down on the workshop floor and I cried, not from sadness, she searched for the word, from something that was the opposite of *Selhari, from gratitude that didn't have grief in it yet." He looked at her for a long moment. "Is that," his voice was careful, "is that about the table or about—" "Both," she said, "but mostly." She touched the cord bracelet on her wrist, the morning gratitude bracelet from the grandmother in Portland. "Mostly it was about being somewhere I didn't want to leave, about having something I was afraid of losing." She looked at him directly. "About you." The workshop was very quiet. The evening light came through the north windows and laid itself across the walnut table in long bars, and the wood smelled clean, and he crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, and he didn't reach for her hands or touch her face or do any of the things she might have expected. He just stood close enough that she could have leaned against him if she chose, and said, quietly, "I would very much like to take you to the soup place on Harbor Street." She felt the silver markings at her temples brighten, which was not something she could control, and he saw them and his expression did something soft and sure. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." Part 5, What Comes After. They went to the soup place that night. It was a small restaurant, busy, warm, the kind of place that has been in operation long enough that it has settled into itself. The staff knew the regulars and the menu was short and handwritten on a board. The woman who owned it, Mrs. Cho, greeted Caleb by name and glanced at Sale with the frank curiosity of someone who was interested in people, and not particularly interested in performing indifference to difference. "Who's this?" she said. "Sale," Caleb said. She lives with me, above the shop." Said Mrs. Cho, appraising. "You like spicy." "I don't know," Sale said. "I haven't tried much spicy food." "Try the house soup," Mrs. Cho said, pointing at the menu board without looking at it. "If you like it, you're a person of taste. If you don't, we'll find you something else." She smiled, brief and genuine. "Sit wherever." They sat at the table by the window that looked out over Harbor Street and the dark water beyond it. The soup arrived in large bowls, the broth sweet and complex, the noodles exactly as advertised, and Sale took the first careful sip and thought, "This is a small thing. This is one of the real ones." "Well," Caleb said. "It's very good," she said. He looked pleased in the uncomplicated way of someone who has wanted to share a thing, and has now shared it. She looked at him across the small table in the warm light of the restaurant, at the crow's feet beginning at the corners of his eyes, and the way he held his spoon, and the way he was looking at her with the same full attention he had had on the dock, in the rain, when he had been a stranger who couldn't make himself keep walking. She thought about 47 applications and Donna Heller and the peeling mural in the Integration Center, and the transit voucher in her lap, and her face in her hands at the end of the dock. She thought, and then a human said, "Come home with me." Not those words exactly, not as a gesture or a charity or a rescue. Just a room above a workshop, and a fern on the windowsill, and time, and a man who practiced saying her name correctly before he had any reason to. "You're doing the thing again," he said. She looked at him. "What thing?" "The quiet thing, where you're thinking something and I can see it on your face but you're not sure whether to say it." She was getting used to being read, she realized. It should have felt invasive. It didn't. "I was thinking," she said, "about the dock, about sitting there in the rain." He nodded. "I thought," she said, "that no one wanted me." He held her gaze and didn't flinch from it. "I know," he said quietly. "I was wrong," she said, "about the no one." He set down his spoon. He reached across the table and his hand settled over hers, not gripping, not claiming, just there, warm and deliberate and real. "You weren't wrong about the circumstances," he said. "You were wrong about what the circumstances meant about you." She turned her hand over, and his fingers settled between hers. Outside, Harbor Street was wet with rain and the water was dark, and in the restaurant the noise of other people's evenings moved around them like weather. She felt the silver markings at her temples doing what they did, and she no longer felt the need to manage it or hide it, and his gaze moved there briefly and he said nothing, only held her hand a little more firmly. "The mitered bridal joint," she said. He blinked. "What?" "The joint you were afraid to try." "On the table," she looked at him. "Why don't we try it on the next piece, together?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled, not the small, careful smile she'd seen on the dock, but the real one, the one she'd been learning the shape of for 3 months, the one that reached his eyes and didn't perform anything. "Yeah," he said, "okay, let's try it." The 12 months of the cohabitation agreement ended on a Tuesday in late autumn. Tamsin from the Integration Center called to confirm the formal closure of the arrangement, and asked if Sale would be filing for independent residence or extension. Sale looked out the window of her room, the room with the fern, the cedar smell, the water visible through the glass, and then looked at the workshop below, where she could hear the sound of something being sanded, steady and patient. "Neither," she said. Tamsin waited. "Caleb and I," Sale said, "have been talking about the paperwork for a longer arrangement, a pause, a permanent one." On the other end of the line, Tamsin was quiet for a moment, and then said, in the voice of someone who had delivered a great many transit vouchers and was glad to be delivering something else, "I'll send you the forms." She hung up and went downstairs. He was at the work table, the one she had prepped while he was in Arizona, which had come back from Corvallis with a photograph and a note from the family, and which Caleb had pinned above his workbench without saying much about it. He looked up when she came in. "Tamsin called," she said. "I heard your voice." He set down the sandpaper. "How'd it go?" "She's sending forms." He nodded, watching her. "I told her I was staying," Sale said, "if that's—" "Yes," he said before she could finish. "That is very much what I want." She crossed the workshop and stood beside him at the table and looked at the piece he was working on, the beginning of a bookcase. Oak, the joints already laid out in pencil on the surface. "Mitered bridle on the corners?" she asked. He looked at her sideways. "Mitered bridle on the corners," he confirmed. She picked up the pencil and made a small correction to the layout, the kind of thing she had learned to see over the past months, and he watched her do it with an expression that was not surprise but something settled and sure, the expression of someone who has found what they were looking for in a place they didn't expect to look. She set the pencil down and he reached for her hand, and she let him take it, the cord bracelet warm against her wrist, the workshop smelling of oak and linseed oil, and the rain coming in off the water. And outside through the north windows the Oregon sky was doing something beautiful with the light. Selhari, she had told him, meant the grief that is also gratitude, missing something because it was worth having. She thought there should be a word for the opposite, the gratitude that has no grief in it, the being somewhere and not wanting to leave it and trusting, for the first time in a long time, that you don't have to. Maybe there was one. She would ask the grandmother in Portland. Or maybe she would make one. She had time. And word count, ~9, 750 words duration, minutes at 160 WPM. Film DNA, True Colors 2021, themes of hidden worth being chosen when expecting nothing, loyalty revealed through small acts. Stream, romantic energy family, 3 quiet belonging, alien appearance tier, moderate blue skin, silver markings, luminescent eyes. Story engine, G unexpected sponsor chosen, obstacle, systemic rejection plus institutional barrier ending, mutual commitment.